The entire city was rocked today by a wedding of the century. The marriage of Luke Tram, the young and powerful CEO of Luke Group, and Mr. Jia Tan-Wook Lam, a gentle, highly educated beauty from a prominent family. They were the most admired couple in high society. But the moment the veil was lifted, the entire hall fell into a deathly silence. The woman standing before Luke Tram was not Tan-Wook Lam as everyone had expected, but Takavi, Tan-Wook Lam's adopted sister, not related by blood, and the very person he had once coldly declared, "Her? I never want to see her again in this life." At this moment, she wore a pure white wedding dress, her eyes downcast but her back straight, her lips slightly pressed together as if enduring the stunned and hateful gaze of the man before her. He stared at her, his eyes cold as 1,000-year-old ice. Every word from his lips like a dagger to her heart. "What kind of game are you playing? Kavi? How could you take that place?" Kavi stood still, her hands, in thin lace, clenched tightly. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest, but she offered no explanation, for she knew that anything she said now would be useless. Everything was predetermined, and she was the one pushed into the wedding hall to replace her sister in just one night, before she even had time to understand why she was wearing a wedding dress, signing a marriage certificate, and stepping into the wedding car. It was all like a nightmare with no escape. She didn't love Luke Tram, and she certainly didn't want to be accused of stealing a husband. But when she woke up in a hotel room the day before the wedding, she was forced into a dress, shoved into a car, and pushed onto the altar under the cold gaze of the Ta family. No one asked if she agreed. No one gave her the right to refuse. She was just a chess piece. Sparse applause echoed through the hall, a way to awkwardly smooth over the unforeseen situation. The MC tried to smile and continued the program, and so we have witnessed the sacred moment of the bride and groom. "Please, both of you, sign the marriage certificate." Kavi bowed her head, her hand trembling as she held the pen and signed her name. Just one stroke of ink, but it marked the beginning of a completely different life. She didn't dare look up at Luke Tram, and even less dared to look down at the seats below, where her adoptive mother tried to smile as if everything was normal. While Tan-Wook Lam, the groom's true sister, had completely vanished from the wedding scene. Without a word of explanation after the wedding, everything unfolded like a silent play. Luke Tram didn't say a single word to her on the way back to the villa. The driver and assistant kept their heads bowed in silence, the atmosphere in the car so thick it was suffocating. Only upon arriving home did he speak, his voice hoarse but still carrying a power that crushed others. "I'll give you 5 minutes to explain everything, before I do something I don't want to." Kavi slowly turned around, her gaze at him devoid of plea or resentment, merely the look of a woman who knew she had been thrown into a cruel game where no one cared if she wanted to participate. She said softly, "I don't know how this happened. I never wanted to enter this marriage. If you want to annul it, I'll agree immediately." But Luke Tram was not easily convinced, especially when the person standing before him was someone he had once despised from the bottom of his heart. For she had once secretly loved him, and once, when he was drunk, he had inadvertently given her the first hug she had mistaken for destiny, only to be humiliated by him in front of many. "Who do you think you are, trying to climb so high? You'll never be worthy of entering my world," he scoffed. "You're quite the actress. I almost believed you." Then he coldly turned and left the living room. leaving her standing alone in her now wrinkled pure white wedding dress. No tears fell, but her heart was shattered. On their wedding night, there was no bridal bed, no blessings, no roses, only the chilling silence of the vast villa, where she, a legitimate bride, was confined alone in the living room like a temporary resident. The next day, the newspapers reported on the century wedding between the CEO and a discreet young lady of the T family. There wasn't a single clear photo of the bride. No one knew that behind that veil lay a different identity, a different fate, a love that had barely bloomed before being crushed by hatred and layers of misunderstanding. That evening, Kavi quietly stepped onto the balcony. The wind gently rustled her dress. From the third floor, she could see the entire garden below, where the lights were off, the trees silent. She bit her lip gently, wondering what she had done to fall into this situation. Then suddenly remembered her adoptive mother's gaze that morning, not panicked, not surprised, as if everything was part of their plan, and she was merely a substitute chess piece when the real person decided to run away. Her reason told her to leave, but her pride and self-respect prevented her from running away in a wedding dress, and she couldn't explain anything to that man, who, from tomorrow, would be her legal husband on paper, yet was someone who didn't want her to exist in his life. Kavi exhaled, softly muttering to herself, "If I've been pushed into this marriage, then, at least I must live up to my identity." The door behind her suddenly swung open. Luke Tramtam stood there, hands in his pockets, his eyes emotionless. "I won't touch you, but remember, if you dare to cross the line, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life." Kavi turned around, her eyes calmly meeting his. "Don't worry. I despise bothering you more than you despise me." For an instant, both fell silent, their eyes locking like two sharp swords, full of caution and suspicion. Neither realized they had just entered a marriage without love, but it would be the beginning of a chain of tragedies, betrayals, and ultimately, a love so deep it would become inseparable, even though it began with hatred. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin gray curtains, but the bridal room still held a suffocatingly cold atmosphere. Kavi woke up after a restless night, her eyes dry, her head heavy, and the wedding dress from last night had been replaced by a simple nightgown brought by the maid when she sat silently on the sofa all night. She didn't know how to face the new day, because although she bore the title of Luke Group CEO's legal wife, in reality, she was no different from a surplus object misplaced. A regular 3 knocks sounded at the door. Then a decisive voice from behind the cold wooden door, "Come down for breakfast. 5 minutes. I don't care if you want to or not." She bit her lower lip, said nothing, just stood up, tidied her hair, put on an outer garment, and walked downstairs. Each step felt like touching shards of ice, a vague anger simmering within her, angry at herself, at her sister, and at her cruel fate. The long dining table was covered with a pristine white cloth, breakfast meticulously arranged with a mix of Asian and European dishes, but the atmosphere was as taut as a string. Luke Tramtam sat at the head of the table, his eyes never leaving the documents in his hand. Only when she sat down did he casually place his coffee cup onto the porcelain saucer, then spoke with a voice heavy with contempt. "I don't care how you and Wok Lam orchestrated this charade, nor do I need to know who the mastermind is, but from today on, remember your place, a wife only in name, nothing more." Kavi gripped the coffee spoon in her hand, her eyes unusually cold. She didn't argue, only said softly, "I never asked to marry you. Nor do I need your acceptance as your wife. Just let me live peacefully in this house. After 3 months, I will voluntarily sign the divorce papers. Is that enough?" Her unexpected answer made Tram pause slightly. For a second, he looked up at her, a cold smile curving his lips. 3 months? Do you think this is a child's game? You dared to replace your sister and walk into the wedding. And now you're setting conditions for me? He slammed the documents onto the table, the dry rustle of paper against wood startling the surrounding servants. She maintained her calm gaze, not flinching from his fierce look. Her voice was strangely steady. "I didn't replace anyone. I was forced. And if you don't believe me, I have no obligation to convince you. But I have my pride. I'm not here to fight or demand anything from you." A silence fell between them. Then Tram let out a cold laugh, his eyes seemingly covered in a frosty mist. "Pride? Someone who dares to wear a wedding dress that wasn't meant for her speaks of pride? Don't you find your words laughable?" Kavi didn't blink. She replied, "You think you know everything. But the truth might just be what others have set up for you. Someday, when you know who the real deceiver is, I only hope you'll have enough courage to apologize." That statement was like a reverse dagger, sharp enough to momentarily pierce through the man's cold exterior. But then he quickly regained his hardened expression, stood up abruptly, and slowly spoke each word like nails being hammered in. "Never think I will bow to you. To Kavi, you can stay here, but only as a decorative doll. Nothing more. You will never hope to be touched by me." She gently closed her eyes, her hand trembling under the table. Not from fear, but from pain, the pain of being insulted, of being crushed from the very first moment of this loveless marriage. She had thought that if she yielded, she might find peace. But it turned out that whether she stood still or resisted, she would be equally disdained. A silent rage rose within her, like lava flowing beneath seemingly calm rock. That morning, they shared a cold meal in silence, and throughout the day, Luke Tram went to work as usual. But Kavi was not locked in her room as she had imagined. Instead, the butler took her on a tour of the villa, briefly introducing every area. She was allowed to use all parts of the house, except the 3rd floor, where his private office was located, an absolute forbidden zone. What was strange was that no one in the house treated her as a stranger. The maids were polite, the butler respectful, even addressing her as Madam by her proper title. But deep down, she understood that it was all formality. Just like Luke Tram accepting her existence, not out of love, but because of the contractual obligation on paper that couldn't be undone overnight. In the afternoon, she was taken to a shopping mall for a fitting. As the CEO's wife, Kavi needed to attend some upcoming social events. Though she wasn't interested, she didn't resist. She entered the VIP area, and the sales assistant's eyes widened when she saw the name on the black card the butler handed over. A few seconds later, the manager personally appeared, bowing respectfully. "Madam Luke, please choose whatever you like. We have prepared our most exclusive collection." For the first time in her life, she stepped into a world that had previously belonged only to her sister, luxurious, elegant, and cold. She looked into the large mirror and saw herself in an expensive silk dress, her face lightly made up, her tired eyes still unable to hide a rare aura. To Kavi, she was no longer the small, downtrodden adopted daughter, but Luke Tram's legal wife. and that very identity would make her a thorn in the side of those who didn't want the exchange to be exposed. That evening, Luke Dramtam came home late. He didn't eat dinner, merely passed by her like a cold gust of wind. But as he ascended the stairs, he unexpectedly stopped and turned around. His voice like thunder in the night. Tomorrow night is Luke Group's party. You'll come with me. And from now on, even if you don't want to, you must fulfill your role as Madame Luke perfectly. Because I don't need any scandals to affect my reputation. Understand? She looked up at him, nodding slightly. I won't make you lose face, CEO. In that moment, their eyes met. No longer just a battle line, but also a strange premonition that this marriage, seemingly only existing on paper, would lead them both further than they imagined. That night, when all the villa lights were off, only the faint glow from the wall lamps lit the labyrinthine hallway. Takavi stood silently before the door to the main room on the second floor, theoretically the bridal suite for newlyweds. Her hand rested on the cold doorknob. She took a deep breath as if gathering all her remaining courage, then gently turned it. The soft click resonated slowly, marking a turning point from which she could never return. The bedroom was so vast it could contain a small apartment within. The light was soft. The large bed covered with pristine white linens, leather sofas, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark garden. Luke Tramtam stood with his back to her, one hand holding a glass of wine, the other in his pocket. His figure was tall, arrogant, and so cold it seemed he belonged to another world, a world she should never have entered. Her footsteps were very light, but they still made him turn around, his eyes as calm as if he had been waiting. He raised the wine glass, took a sip, then slowly placed it on the table. He then approached her, stopping less than half a meter away, his deep black eyes fixed on her as if to pierce through every layer of her facade. His voice was low, each word clear as a blade gliding over skin. Do you truly believe that just by wearing that wedding dress and signing that paper, you can become my wife? Kavi stood motionless, her eyes not flinching, just silently looking at him. Her voice soft but surprisingly steady. No, I never thought I was worthy of being your wife. I am just paying the price for a game I didn't choose to play. Luke Dramtam raised an eyebrow slightly, a cold curve on his lips. You're smart, but being smart doesn't mean you'll be forgiven. You stole the place of the woman I intended to marry. You ruined my plans, and now you expect me to treat you kindly? He took another step forward, his breath carrying the scent of wine mixed with hatred. Kavi was forced back a bit, her back hitting the doorframe, but she still lifted her head to face him, her gaze unwavering. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want to live my part. 3 months. Just 3 months. A dry, hollow laugh escaped his mouth. A laugh filled with sarcasm mixed with an indignation whose source she couldn't understand. Then he leaned close to her face, whispering in her ear, each word heavy as a stone, I won't touch you, because I'm not base enough to sleep with someone who borrowed a name to enter my life. But I don't think you'll gain freedom. I will make every day you live here remind you who you replaced. She turned her face away, not letting tears fall, because she knew that even a single tear would only make him scorn her more. So she held on to her remaining pride, and softly said, I don't need freedom. Just keep your word. He paused for half a second, then turned and pulled out his phone. I'll have someone prepare the guest room. And you, get out of here immediately. Never set foot in this room again. Without waiting for her reaction, he turned and left, leaving behind a cold void and the heavy sound of her heart shattering in her chest. Takavi clenched her hands tightly, her fingernails digging deep into her palms until they drew blood. But she felt no pain, because the physical pain was nothing compared to those words, every single one tearing at her choked pride. She walked out of the bridal room, standing silently in the hallway for a long time, before being led by the maid downstairs to a temporarily arranged auxiliary room on the first floor, much smaller, simpler, with no large windows, no fragrant white orchids like the second floor, just a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a laminated wood desk. Yet, it was the first place since her marriage where she was allowed to breathe freely without feeling like a misplaced object. She sank onto the bed, closing her eyes in exhaustion. But the image of that man, his eyes, his voice, kept replaying in her mind like an inescapable nightmare. The next morning, when she went down to the dining room, Luke Dramtam was nowhere to be seen. Only the butler softly announced, "The master left early for work. He said Madam doesn't need to prepare breakfast for him." She nodded slightly, saying nothing, and quietly ate her meal alone in the vast space, each bite feeling choked in her throat. She didn't understand why Tanwaklam had disappeared on her wedding day, nor why her adoptive mother, who had always been gentle and loving towards her, had closed her eyes and nodded for her to replace her sister at the wedding. She only knew one thing: she had become the scapegoat for some scheme that she still hadn't fully recognized. She pulled out her phone and called Nwaklam. It went straight to voicemail. She called her adoptive mother, no answer. She felt like someone abandoned in the desert, with no escape. But deep down, a current suddenly surged within her, that if she had been pushed into this marriage as a pawn, then at least, she wouldn't let others continue to control the game without fear. That evening, she opened her laptop and logged into her old email, the account she used for volunteer projects during university. An inbox appeared, a message from someone named TD. The content only a few lines. "You've entered the Luke family. I know this wasn't your choice, but you should know, he doesn't remember anything. We will meet again, very soon." She read the words over and over, her palms growing cold, because the phrase "he doesn't remember anything" immediately brought back a vague, long-buried memory. 10 years ago, a stormy night, a wounded teenager who collapsed by the roadside, a 15-year-old girl who ran to save him, cared for him in a small shack in the poor boarding house area, then quietly disappeared after he woke up without knowing the name of his rescuer. She had once thought it was just a beautiful memory, never thinking she would meet that person again, and that person was none other than Luke Dramtam. She froze, staring at the screen without blinking. Then, as if waking from a trance, she told herself, "If he doesn't remember, then I'll make him remember. Not because I love him, but because I need to know why fate has pushed me this far." And so, the marriage that began with a switch would become the thread connecting past and present, where love, truth, and even hatred awaited their resurgence. On a quiet Monday morning, Takavi sat alone in her small room on the first floor. Light from the tiny window slanted across the dark carpet. Outside the villa, gentle bird song and the distant sound of traffic from the main road could be heard. But nothing was enough to fill the emptiness in her heart. 3 days had passed since she stepped into this house as Luke Dramtam's legal wife, but she knew well that everything was just a facade, a marriage certificate with no real value. a stolen identity, and a life swapped by conspiracy. She opened the drawer next to her bed and took out an old, yellowed leather notebook, the only thing she had brought from her old room at the family home before being forced to marry. This diary was where she had once written things she couldn't say since she was 15, since she began to feel what injustice was, what loneliness was. In a family where she was merely an extra with the title adopted sister. Her fingers flipped through the smudged pages, then stopped at a dog-eared page, where she had recorded notes about that person, a boy she had once saved in the pouring rain late at night when she was just a young girl walking home from extra classes. At that time, he was wounded in the shoulder, unconscious at a deserted bus stop, rain pouring down, his entire body soaked and freezing. She didn't think much, simply couldn't abandon someone on the verge of death. She wrote, that day, August 20. I dragged him into the old tent behind Aunt Six's boarding house, wrapped him in a towel, covered him with a blanket, and cooked ginger porridge. He had a high fever and was delirious, calling out someone named Min, then repeating the word sorry. I didn't ask further, just sat beside him until he woke up. He had deep, cold eyes, but when he looked at me, he was startled, then left without a word of thanks. I only managed to press into his hand a necklace I had woven myself from old twine, tied with a pale blue stone I picked up at the beach. He looked at it for a very long second, then left. Carvi's finger froze on that line. Her heart suddenly constricted. It had been so many years since she thought of that memory. She had convinced herself it was just a coincidence, just a good deed that left no mark. But now, after reading the email from the person with the initials TD the night before, with the line he doesn't remember anything, she dared to touch the doubt that she had buried deep in her heart, that Luke Dramtam, the man who was doing everything to humiliate her every day, might be that boy from all those years ago. She trembling flipped to the next pages, where scattered notes recorded seemingly trivial things, but each sentence contained repressed loneliness, from feeling compared to her sister by her adoptive mother, from being forced to quit music lessons because it was unnecessary for an adopted daughter, to the times she silently retreated, yielding everything to Nwoklam, even the chance to meet that boy again. When Luke Tramtam first came to the family home at a family party 2 years later, she only dared to watch from afar, while Nwoklam stepped forward, smiling brightly like a refined young lady, softly saying, "Hello, Tam. I am Nwoklam." She never thought that Tam's gaze at Nwoklam that day would linger for too long for her to suspect that he might have mistaken the person, mistaken his savior from that year. She closed the notebook, her hands placed on her chest, where her heart was beating unusually fast. She had to verify, at all costs. At noon, she quietly went up to the 3rd floor, considered the forbidden zone of the villa. But at that moment, he wasn't home, and the butler was out on personal errands. It was her only chance. She gently opened the wooden door and stepped into the minimalist yet coldly elegant workspace. Bookshelves were filled with leather-bound documents. On the desk, a photo frame lay face down. She picked it up. It was just a family photo of his parents. No girl in it. She scanned the room for something familiar. Then her eyes stopped at a small wooden box on a high shelf. She stood on a chair, reached for the box, and opened it. Inside were a few trinkets, a fountain pen, an old watch, a faded embroidered handkerchief, and something that made her hand tremble, an old twine necklace. its pale blue stone worn smooth by time. Her heart tightened, her hand clutching the tiny object. It was the necklace she had made from old rice sack string. The stone was something she had picked up during her only beach trip when she was 12. That object was unique, and now it lay in the secret compartment of the man she had married. The man who had once declared he never wanted to see her face again. She stepped back, collapsing onto the chair, her heart in a turmoil she couldn't name, surprise, shock, or pain, because if Luke Tram was the person she had saved, why didn't he remember her? Or did he remember, but was deliberately pretending? Or did he mistake the girl from that year for Nwaklam? She bit her lip tightly, took a photo of the necklace with her phone, then carefully put everything back as it was, leaving the room before anyone noticed. Her mind filled with 100 intertwining thoughts. That afternoon, while sitting in the villa's library, she typed into the search bar, Luke Tram plus 17 years old plus accident plus missing. A few old articles appeared from online news archives. Brief reports: only son of Luke family kidnapped. Missing for 3 days. Found in high fever and disoriented. Family refused to disclose details. Incident kept quiet. Suspected to be related to rivals in the financial world. Kavi read that, her heart feeling like it stopped. She clearly remembered the day she found that teenager. His shirt was torn. There was blood on his shoulder. And he was mumbling "Min, forgive me" before losing consciousness. 3 days. It matched perfectly. That evening, during their brief meal, she looked at him, her eyes more scrutinizing than usual. But he remained as cold as a stone statue, not even bothering to look up at her. Just saying in a dry voice, "Don't forget the company party tomorrow, 7 p.m. Dress appropriately for your status. I don't want any slip-ups in front of the media." She nodded, replying in a voice as light as a breeze, "I won't make you lose face." But Tram, have you ever thought that some memories, if hidden for too long, can make people mistake one person for another? He frowned, his gaze drilling into her. "What are you implying?" She smiled, hiding all her emotions. "Nothing. I was just rambling." Then she stood up and left the dining room, leaving him with a heavy gaze filled with doubts that had just begun to surface. Kavi knew that from this moment on, everything would change. She was no longer a pawn pushed onto the marriage chessboard. She was the one holding the forgotten piece of the past, and she would be the one to make Luke Tram remember everything. Even if the price was love, hatred, or a heart torn apart yet again. Crystal chandeliers cast light upon the ballroom like a galaxy descending to Earth. The Luke Group's evening party was held at a 5-star international hotel, a gathering of powerful entrepreneurs, prominent figures in finance, fashion, and media. Every step on the red carpet was a subtle display of power and status. When Kavi walked down from the Rolls-Royce arm in arm with Luke Tram, flashlights immediately exploded around them like fireworks. But amidst the thick clicking of cameras, Kavi maintained a straight posture, walking calmly with her eyes fixed forward, the perfect demeanor of a legitimate Madame Luke. Her sapphire blue evening gown shimmered faintly with every movement, her hair proudly styled in an updo, her light makeup highlighting her delicate features. All of this momentarily stunned the media, as they were accustomed to a gentle, timid Nwaklam in all her previous appearances beside CEO Luke. But now, the woman beside him was neither weak nor bland. She was radiant, sharply captivating, Difficult to forget. Is that the new madam? Isn't that Tunwok Lam? Where is she? Who is this woman? Her aura is so different. Whispers spread throughout the hall but were quickly silenced under Luke Tramtam's cold gaze. He said nothing, nor did he smile, merely led Kavi directly to the center area, where VIP seats were reserved for the chairman and his wife. Once everyone was settled, the MC began the program with a speech praising the group's success and announcing the launch of new international partnerships, a boost for the rapidly rising stock price. Kavi sat beside Tramtam, quietly observing everything, her eyes scanning each face among the elite, unexpectedly stopping at a young man in a grey suit who was smiling politely, a face familiar enough to send chills down her spine. It was Duong Trit, her childhood friend, and the man she had almost agreed to marry before the events forced her to wed Tramtam. Duong Trit also saw her, his eyes stopping on hers for just a second. But both knew, they remembered. He maneuvered his way over, stopped in front of her, and bowed respectfully. Long time no see. Kavi. She nodded slightly. Her voice soft. I didn't expect you to attend Luke Group's event. Duong Trit smiled. A new partner from Duke Win Group invited me along. Then his eyes briefly flickered to Luke Tramtam, as he politely extended his hand. CEO Luke. I am Duong Trit, Kavi's old classmate. Tramtam shook his hand. His eyes far from friendly. I know. You're the one that her family once intended to be her future husband. The air around them stiffened slightly. Kavi bit her lower lip, her eyes quickly glancing at the man beside her. She hadn't thought he would be so blunt, let alone say it in front of partners and reporters. Duong Trit maintained his composure. Yes. But now I only see her as a friend, worthy of respect. He then gave a slight bow and withdrew before causing any more trouble. But the real storm hadn't even begun. 15 minutes later, the MC stepped onto the stage, beaming. Today we not only celebrate Luke Group's major strides, but also have the honor of welcoming a special guest, the founder of the international fashion brand Laven, and also the famous Mr. Jia, Tunwok Lam. The entire hall stirred, and at that moment, all the lights focused on the grand staircase. A graceful figure emerged, dressed in a simple yet elegant white gown, her hair flowing loosely, her lips a luscious red. It was Nwok Lam, beautiful as a painting. Her eyes gentle as morning mist yet cold enough to freeze spring itself. Kavi stiffened, her fingers clutching the glass of water in her hand until her knuckles turned white. Tramtam didn't speak, but his back was ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on the other woman. Tunwok Lam descended the steps, a faint smile playing on her lips, unable to hide a vague triumph. She approached Tramtam and Kavi, gently bowing. It's an honor to attend your evening party. Tramtam. Long time no see. The air between the three of them thickened. No one spoke for a moment. Then Tramtam nodded slightly. I thought you wouldn't come. His words were half accusation, half challenge. Nwok Lam smiled lightly, her eyes darting to Kavi. You know, I don't give up easily, especially when what belongs to me hasn't been returned. Kavi tightened her grip on the glass even more, looking up at her sister. What are you saying? Nwok Lam? Nwok Lam turned to her, her voice light as if chatting over tea. I'm just saying, it's not over, and I still have the right to return to the place I rightfully belong. The entire hall buzzed. The MC tried to redirect the atmosphere by inviting a singer to perform, But Tanwaklam's words had already detonated a bomb that captured every gaze. After the performance, Tram Tam stood up, bowing politely. "Excuse me. I must leave the party early. My wife needs to rest." He didn't look at Nwoklam, only pulled Kavai's hand, his hand gripping her wrist for the first time as if a silent declaration to the crowd. But once in the car, he immediately let go. His eyes darkened. "You must be very happy, right? I suppose you also had a hand in orchestrating today's play?" Kavi tilted her head, looking at him with a sarcastic gaze. "Do you think I have enough power to manipulate Nwoklam? Or do you think I'm so desperate that I'd play games to keep you here?" He let out a cold laugh. "What wouldn't you dare to do? You even dared to borrow an identity. So a little act is nothing." She leaned towards him, her eyes sharp and cold as ice. "I never borrowed anything. I just bore the consequences for someone else. As for who owes whom, I'm afraid it will be clear sooner or later." Luke Tram Tam didn't reply. His face taut like a string. He looked out through the car window. No one knew what he was thinking, but ever since Nwoklam appeared, that familiar sense of confusion and vagueness returned to him, like a memory picture flipped to the wrong angle. And for a moment, he didn't know whom to believe. That night, the atmosphere in the car was suspended between the two of them, the silence as taut as a string. After the party, the world seemed to spin into Kavai's head. Tanwoklam's eyes, appearing before her, were no longer those of the gentle sister from 10 years ago, but those of a stranger with a half-hidden smile, as if simultaneously stifling her heart and deliberately throwing her into a no-win game. But most painful of all was Luke Tram Tam's gaze toward Nwoklam. At that moment, there was a flicker of hesitation, a brief wavering that she didn't want to admit. When the car stopped in front of the villa, Kavi was the first to open the door and step out, her high heels clicking sharply on the stone pavement. She didn't wait for him to speak, just walked straight into the house. But his voice from behind seemed to cling to her back. "You once asked me if I had mistaken someone. The answer is, I don't know anymore." She stopped, slowly turned around, her eyes clear as it had been raining since 3 in the morning, the heavy rhythm of the rain tapping on the second-floor window pane. Luke Tram Tam opened his eyes, unsure if it was a lingering midnight dream or an unprecedented tightness in his chest that kept him from sleeping. He sat up, leaning against the headboard, the dim bedside lamp casting light on half of his sharply angled, cold face, but his deep black eyes were shrouded in an inscrutable mist. He didn't know when it started, but Takavai's image had begun to intrude into the quiet spaces he always kept for himself, not because of her appearance, and certainly not because of the identity she now bore, but because of her words, her gazes, and the way she faced him without evasion, flattery, or attempts at seduction. She was too quiet while living in a turbulent world, and that very stillness gradually unsettled him, especially since the party, since Tanwoklam's sudden return and everything he had once believed began to waver. He realized something had been wrong from the start. He stood up, walked to the large glass cabinet in his study, where the wooden box holding his old possessions still lay untouched. He opened the lid of the box, picked up the faded twine necklace, the pale blue stone pendant still intact, only slightly frayed at the edges. He clearly remembered being 17, waking up after 3 days of mysterious disappearance, finding this necklace in his hand. He had no clear memory, only knowing that a girl had cared for him for several days. wiping him down, cooking porridge, even singing lullabies, but he had never clearly seen her face. Whenever the memory tried to surface, it was only the sound of rain and the strong smell of ginger in the bowl of porridge. At that time, he searched everywhere, but no one claimed to be his savior. Only fragmented memories, and this necklace remained as the sole proof. Later, when he met Tanwok Lam at a party arranged by both their parents, the girl wore a white dress, smiled gently, her eyes wet like autumn water. He didn't know why he believed she was that person. Perhaps because when he looked into her eyes, he thought he saw the familiar feeling from his delirium that year. And he decided, only she was the missing piece. He spent 3 years pursuing her, never doubting, until today. He tightened his grip on the necklace, a sharp glint in his eyes, then opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of documents, the full profiles of both her family sisters. Before, he hadn't cared about Takavi, so he hadn't looked closely. But now, rereading, he found a few discrepancies. The dates she lived in the southern city's boarding house coincided with where he had been rescued. The period she took half a year off school due to illness also matched the time he went missing and was rescued. And especially, in the list of personal items she submitted to the school, there was a note, bluestone pendant, self-made. His heart stopped. For the first time, a truth like a knife sliced straight through every misplaced belief. The next morning, the rain had stopped. He called his personal assistant. "I need all the hotel hallway camera footage from the wedding day." 3 hours before the ceremony, the assistant was momentarily startled but nodded. An hour later, he received the edited recording. The footage clearly showed the person wearing the wedding dress who entered the dressing room initially was not Kavi, but Tanwok Lam. However, 3 unfamiliar service staff then appeared, put a veil over her head, and took her away. The camera didn't clearly record the car's license plate, but what was strange was that a few minutes later, Kavi appeared, her hands still red as if freshly tied. He clenched his fists, his heart pounding wildly. So, she had been taken out but somehow returned to the wedding, while the person who was supposed to be the bride completely disappeared. If she could escape a kidnapping plot on such an important day, then she was not as weak as he thought. On the contrary, she was stronger than anyone. That evening, he returned to the villa and saw her in the small garden behind, her hand resting on the fountain, her eyes dreamily gazing at the sky that had just cleared from the rain. He walked over, saying nothing, just stood beside her for a few seconds before softly asking, "Did you ever go to Fomin Ward's boarding house 10 years ago?" She turned to him, her eyes fluttering gently like ripples. "Yes. I lived there for 2 years." He nodded slightly, his fingers in his pocket clenching. A long silence stretched between them. Then he slowly opened his mouth. "I was once kidnapped. When I was 17. After 3 days, I woke up in that boarding house, holding a stone necklace in my hand. And you know, it's identical to what I just found in your personal records." She froze, her eyes flickering slightly, then looked deeply at him. "So, you finally remember?" He nodded. For the first time in a long while, they looked at each other not with wariness or hostility, but with a gaze searching for lost fragments in their memory. But that peaceful moment didn't last long before his phone rang. His assistant urgently reported, "CEO, there's a problem. Mr. Nwok Lam seems to have just posted on social media. She claims she was forced to leave the wedding, and now she's pregnant with your child." Luke Tramtam gripped the phone. his face ice cold. Kavi heard every word clearly, but her eyes no longer showed panic. Only a faint question, "Are you going to believe her?" Tram Tam looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. "No. I will investigate. But if that child isn't mine, then this game, I will end it my way." She didn't smile, just quietly replied, "I'll wait." The storm of memories finally surged, and the scars that seemed to have healed were bleeding once more. At 3 p.m., the hashtag #Tanwaklam pregnant with Luke group shows child skyrocketed to the top of Weibo trending topics in less than half an hour after being posted. Thousands of shares, tens of thousands of comments erupted, everyone buzzing about a blurry ultrasound photo with an enigmatic caption, "There was once a white dream, but it was stolen by a veil that didn't belong to me. I have no regrets. Only regret that he no longer remembers who risked her life for him." No names needed. No tags necessary. The media, like hungry tigers, immediately pounced. Everyone in the industry was familiar with the previously sensational several-year relationship between Luke Tram Tam and Tanwaklam. And above all, that girl was the biological sister of the current Madam Luke. Pregnancy rumors, plus the identity switch at the wedding, shifted all the discussions towards Kavi, who suddenly transformed from a faint adopted sister to the target of social media's scorn. Meanwhile, in the 39th floor office of Luke Group headquarters, Luke Tram Tam stood silently before a computer screen displaying the post. His expression unchanged but his eyes sharp as razors. Assistant Dure nervously reported, "Confirmed, it's Tanwaklam's official account. The ultrasound photo is real, but the hospital name on the image was intentionally blurred." Tram Tam clenched his hand. His voice low as thunder, "Prepare the car. To the private clinic where I once took Tanwaklam for a health checkup." The assistant immediately nodded. Less than half an hour later, his car stopped at a renowned private clinic known for its discretion. The chief doctor personally came out to greet him. "CEO Luke, what would you like to verify?" "Tanwaklam's prenatal records. I need to know if I am the father of the child." The doctor paused briefly, then shook his head slightly. "Sir, medically, to determine paternity requires a DNA sample for comparison. But, as far as I know, her last visit here was 5 weeks ago, and she was already 4 to 5 weeks pregnant then, meaning roughly a month before the wedding." Tram Tam frowned. "Did she come with anyone?" The doctor was silent for a moment before saying softly, "A man, identity unknown, used a false name, but I distinctly remember, he had a tattoo on his left wrist." Tram Tam's heart stopped. That detail was unmistakable, because the tattoo matched the description of one person, Tanjui, his former assistant, who was fired for leaking internal contracts to a rival. He immediately pulled out his phone and called Dure to investigate Tanjui's entire whereabouts over the past 3 months. Every meeting, every bank transaction, especially the day before the wedding. Hanging up, he returned to his car. On the way, he received an email from an anonymous source. The subject line just 4 words, "Not your child." He opened it to an audio file. A man's voice, distorted but every word clear. "Lam, don't be afraid. Just tell him it's his child. Luke Tram Tam won't dare to investigate. He still owes you too much." Tram Tam's fingers tightened on the phone, his knuckles cracking, rage surging but suppressed by his icy facade. Upon arriving at the villa, he saw Kavi sitting in the living room, a stack of documents in her hand. She already knew. He said nothing, just handed her his phone to listen to the audio file. After listening, her lips pressed together, but she showed no surprise. I knew she would use the child to turn the situation around, but I didn't think she'd go to this extent. He nodded. I won't let you be dragged into this. Once is enough. For the first time, his voice held a hint of regret. Kavi looked at him for a long time, then softly asked, "What are you going to do?" "I will expose the truth. But I need you to remain silent for a few days. Absolutely no replies to the press. No reactions. Let her think everything is according to plan." She nodded slightly. "I trust you." Her words were as light as wind, but they made his heart pause. Since when did her gaze no longer avoid his? Since when did he start to feel at ease when she looked directly at him like that? The next day, mainstream media simultaneously reported, Luke Group declines to comment on rumors concerning the CEO's private life. The current Madame Luke has made no statements. Kavi's silence frustrated the media, and articles attacking her began to erupt. Adopted sister stealing husband, legal mistress, substitute bride swapper, all seemed to want to bury her. But she remained calm, still eating breakfast alone in the quiet garden, still reading as if nothing had happened. And it was this very calmness that made Tram Tam begin to wonder, how much more was this woman hiding? That evening, in his study, Tram Tam received a report from Jia. Dan Jui had transferred money to an account under Nwa Klam's relative's name. But more importantly, he had been abroad for 2 weeks. Coinciding with the period Nwa Klam was also traveling for recuperation according to the media. I have surveillance footage from Toronto International Hospital. The couple who came for the prenatal checkup were Han Jui and Nwa Klam. Tram Tam played the video, which showed Nwa Klam covering her face with sunglasses, her hand on her belly, while Dan Jui helped her into the clinic. Both were intimate. Without any hesitation, he turned off the screen, his eyes as deep as the sea. Early the next morning, he called his lawyer, "Prepare the procedures for a prenatal DNA test. I will force her to make it public." The lawyer nodded, and that same day, Luke Group publicly issued a press release on its official website. Luke Group does not interfere in private matters, but at the same time will protect the honor of those associated with the CEO and the current Madame Luke. False information will be subject to legal action. Regarding the child mentioned in the rumors, if truly existing, the CEO is ready to cooperate with a public prenatal test to verify the relationship. As soon as the information was released, social media was shaken again. Nwa Klam never expected Tram Tam to retaliate so quickly, forcing her to face the truth. She immediately went live to explain, "I don't want to cause trouble. I just want to be a mother. But if that person no longer loves me, I accept raising the child alone." But her eyes, her every word trembled, because she knew, just one test, and everything would collapse. That night, Tram Tam returned home and saw Kavi standing on the second-floor balcony, still holding a hot cup of tea. He walked over, watching her tilt her head and ask, "Aren't you angry?" She gently shook her head. "Anger won't make me stronger. It will only make me hurt more." He stood still, then blurted out, "If that year, I hadn't mistaken the person, if I had remembered that the girl back then was you, what would you do?" She smiled faintly, not turning around. "I wouldn't let you live in doubt. But if you chose the wrong person again, I wouldn't forgive myself either." He looked at her for a long time, something in his eyes about to burst. But then he only softly said, "This time, I won't make a mistake again." The words fell like a promise, as light as rain, and as heavy as fate. At 10 in the morning, the sealed meeting room of Danthan International Hospital was silent as a tomb. On the meeting table lay only a white envelope, sealed in red with a clear inscription: "Top secret, prenatal DNA test results." Luke Tramtam sat at the head of the table, his eyes sharp and cold, the dim light reflecting a glimmer in his deep black eyes like an abyss. Opposite him sat Anwakalam, her face deathly pale, no longer displaying her usual elegance but instead unconcealable anxiety. To his right were Luke Group's private lawyer and the chief obstetrician. No media, no outsiders. This was a private confrontation, but its consequences would shake the entire financial world. The lawyer spoke first, based on Luke Group CEO's request for a prenatal paternity test. "Today we announce the official results, to put an end to all speculation affecting the honor of both parties." He pushed the envelope towards Tramtam. He opened it, pulled out the thick paper, and scanned down to the last line, where the doctor had highlighted the conclusion: paternity probability between sample A, Luke Tramtam, and the fetal sample, no blood relationship. He showed no emotion, simply placed the paper back on the table. His gaze shifting to Tanwakalam. She sat frozen, her face so pale it looked almost bloodless, her lips trembling but unable to utter a single word. After a long moment, she blurted out, "It's impossible. There must be a mistake. There must be some error." The doctor calmly replied, "We have tested twice, with verification using 2 independent gene samples. The conclusion is undeniable." The lawyer looked at Tramtam, asking softly, "Do you wish to pursue legal action?" He waved his hand, his voice terrifyingly cold, "Not yet." Then he stood up, his gaze sweeping over the woman he had once called his first love for 3 years. "You should know, I hate being used the most. Once, because of the past, I forgave you. But this time, you have touched the honor of the entire Luke family. I will not let it go." With that, he turned his back and strode out of the room, leaving Nwakalam slumped by the table, tears flowing uncontrollably. But they were not tears of regret, rather, those of someone who realized she had lost the most important pawn in the game of power. Because she knew very well, when Luke Tramtam let go, he never looked back. At the same time, at Luke Group's villa, Takavi was watering plants in the garden, holding the watering can lightly as if completely unaware of the storms brewing outside. A moment later, she received an internal call from the butler. "Madam, the CEO is about to return. He asked you to wait in the study." She was momentarily surprised, wiped her hands, then went straight to the second floor. The study door opened. Luke Tramtam was already seated inside, still in his perfectly tailored suit, his hand casually resting on the table, but his eyes were no longer as cold and rigid as usual. When she entered, he looked up, watching her for a long time before saying, "The test results are in." She didn't react, just nodded. "I guessed as much." He stood up, walked closer. For the first time during their life together, he took her hand, gripping it tightly as if afraid that if he didn't, something important would disappear. "I was wrong. Not once, but many times." She looked up at him, her voice low. "I never needed an apology. I just want to know, what will you do from now on?" He looked deeply into her eyes, softly replying, "From today, you are my legal, rightful, and only wife, both in name and before the world. And as for her, He paused, his eyes turning icy. She will have to leave everything, reputation, finances, and what she thought was power. She gently withdrew her hand from his, her eyes bright but calm. So where do we start? From me? Or from the truth of 10 years ago? He didn't flinch, nodding slightly. From memory, and from the 17-year-old girl who risked her life to save me that year. She said nothing, just turned and walked towards the door. Before stepping out of the room, she stopped, without turning back, saying, "If you truly remember everything, tell me, what was the first thing I ever sang to you?" The door closed, leaving him in the fading twilight, where his heart, for the first time, was no longer torn by deceit, but by a memory never truly named. At the same time, the media exploded as an internal source leaked the DNA test results. Netizens were in an uproar. Hashtags like #DonWalkLamLies, #Sia counterattacks, #MadameLukeLegitimate quickly climbed to the top. Lam was drowned in a wave of boycotts, advertising contracts were cancelled, and the fashion brand bearing her name saw investors withdraw funds en masse. Within 48 hours, everything she had meticulously built crumbled like a sandcastle in a storm. But what drove her to despair the most was not losing her glamour, but losing the chance to return to the side of the man she once thought was hers. That evening, when she arrived at the gates of the Luke villa, blocked by 2 bodyguards, she screamed, "I want a seat, Tram. I have something to say." But the reply was only a cold voice echoing from inside. "The CEO says, from today, you have no connection to this place." She froze, her hands trembling as they gripped the iron fence, tears streaming down her face. Her voice choked, "Tram. I was wrong. I was truly wrong. But I never stopped loving you." Her words faded into the night, unanswered. That was the first time she realized, some mistakes, the price of paying for them is losing the rest of your life. A week after the blood test results were made public, the media gradually shifted from criticizing to sympathizing with the falsely accused legal wife, to Carvey. Her name appeared in articles with headlines like "The CEO's Wife, From Her Sister's Shadow to the Woman Who Makes the Entire Luke Group Proud," daughter Carvey, the calmest woman amidst the media storm, and how she maintained her pride in this year's biggest financial scandal. Public opinion began to question, who exactly was this woman? And how could she maintain such rationality, composure, and dignity in a marriage that seemed to be merely a transaction? But within the Luke Group villa itself, those questions echoed with a different tone, coming from the very man who always believed he was in control. Luke Tram sat at his desk, holding a cup of coffee, but his eyes fixed on a photo just sent by his assistant, an image of Carvey sitting on the balcony of the reading room, the wind gently blowing through her hair, creating a delicate, elegant curve as if painted. She didn't know she was being photographed, so her gaze remained calm, her expression serene, as if no storm outside had ever touched her heart. He put the cup down, his eyes deepening, remembering last night. For the first time, he deliberately sat opposite her in the dining room and said, "Tomorrow is the group's new product launch party. I want you to come with me." She was momentarily startled, not by the invitation, but by how he addressed her. No longer you, but a more intimate, gentle form of address. Carvey didn't answer immediately, just quietly picked up another piece of salad, then slowly replied, "If this is a work requirement, I will comply. If it's for you, I need more time." He watched her without blinking, and after a long moment, softly said, "It's both." The launch party was held at the Royal Hotel, the very place where their wedding preparations once took place. Only that time, no one thought she would be the main character stepping out under the lights. But today, everything was different. When the elevator doors opened, the entire ground floor seemed to fall silent for a few seconds. Takavi wore an ivory evening gown, backless, a blue stone bracelet on her wrist, the very gift he had treasured years ago. She walked beside him, his hand gently placed on her waist, not acting, not forced, but voluntarily. Camera lenses continuously clicked. Reporters standing ready on both sides of the red carpet immediately jostled to extend their microphones. CEO Luke, can you confirm, Madam 2 is the one who will accompany you from now on? He didn't stop walking, only tilted his head to look at her and replied in front of all the media, from beginning to end, she has always been the only one. A single sentence that ignited the entire hall. But her heart only trembled slightly, not because of those words, but because of his gaze when he said them, sincere, no longer arrogant, no longer hidden. And that scared her more than the lies of the past. Scared that she would soften again. The party ended at 11 at night. On the way back to the villa, he suddenly slowed down, letting the car drive slowly along a quiet stretch of road. Kavi. He called her by her first name for the first time without her surname. She turned to him, her eyes shining with surprise. When we married, I made it clear, it was just a transaction. You needed a strong enough identity to escape dependence on the two family. And I needed a substitute bride to resolve the media crisis when Waklam disappeared. She nodded slightly. I remember. He looked directly into her eyes. But today, I want to ask, if now, I say, I no longer want to consider this a transaction, would you believe me? Her heart stopped. Her fingers gently tightened on the hem of her dress. She didn't answer, just looked straight ahead, her voice as light as wind. Then you need to clearly define, what do you want now? Is it atonement, responsibility, or a feeling yet to be named? He was silent for a very long time. Then the car stopped at the gate. She opened the door and stepped out, without looking back. If one day you have an answer, tell me. But I don't use that look to make me wait any longer. 3 days later, the media was still buzzing with the aftermath of the party, and Takavi suddenly became a model of a rational, intelligent, and elegant woman, invited to collaborate by numerous brands. But she declined them all. She didn't need fame, and even less the spotlight that came from pity. Tram understood that. And he also understood. She was waiting for him to change, not with words, but with actions. That morning, he had someone send a box to her room. Inside was the cancellation of the marriage contract signed from the beginning, the marriage transaction agreement. Below it was a new paper, a completely new marriage certificate, only with his signature, and a single line, if you are willing, sign it. This time, no conditions, no strings attached, just me and you. Kavi held the paper, her eyes slightly wavering, but then she folded it, put it in the drawer, neither signing nor tearing it. That was how she kept the opportunity open, but also how she reminded him that love is not something that can be measured by conditions or signatures. That evening, when he returned, he saw her sitting in the living room, soft music playing, a glass of wine in her hand with only a sip taken. She turned to him, a gentle yet sharp smile on her face. Luke Tramtam. If one day I leave, will you hold me back because of me? Or because of my title? He didn't answer. He just walked over, sat down beside her, and gently took her hand. I've never held anyone back because of a title. But if you want to know what my heart truly desires, give me one more chance. She withdrew her hand, gently placing it on his chest. Then from now until you find your answer, this heart, I won't touch. Early in the morning, before the sun had risen above the distant mountains, the Luke villa already echoed with the sound of tree pruning in the garden. Carvey stood by the second-floor window, holding a cup of herbal tea, her eyes watching the man meticulously trimming the rose bushes she had mentioned wanting to plant last season. Luke Tramtam wore a rolled-up shirt, no watch, no gloves, every movement careful as if tending to something precious. She frowned slightly. This was not the image of a cold, ascetic CEO, nor did it resemble the person who once declared, "We are just a transaction." This was the image of a man trying to enter the inner world of a woman who had been hurt. 4 days ago, he gave her the new marriage registration form. No conditions, no obligations, no coercion. But she hadn't signed it, not because she didn't want to, but because she needed to know what he would do when there were no longer any benefits binding him to her. And today, she began to see the answer. In the afternoon, his personal assistant Dieu came to find her. "Madame, the CEO asked me to convey, if you are free, please come to the third-floor study. There's a book-sharing session between him and you." She tilted her head. "Book-sharing?" "Yes. The CEO said he wants to hear you talk about the novel you once mentioned, The Nameless Lover in the Wind." Her heart stopped. That was the book she read when she was 18, during the most difficult time in the orphanage, where every night she would read a few pages to forget the sound of rain on the tin roof and the harsh words from her roommates. At that time, only one person had listened to her talk about that book from beginning to end. It wasn't Luke Tramtam, but a man named Tranduat Kiem. She walked up to the third floor and opened the study door. Tramtam was already seated on the sofa, an old, faded copy of the book in his hand. He looked up, his eyes calm but cautious. "I've read it." To page 157. Where the female character decides to leave without a message. She sat down opposite him, placing her hands on her lap, and asked, "Why do you think she left?" He looked at her, slowly replying, "Because she knew that if she continued to wait for someone who never dared to name their feelings, the one who would hurt the most wouldn't be her, but love itself." She looked at him, her eyes slightly moist, but still smiling. "So if that person comes back and says give me a chance, should she believe him?" He replied without hesitation, "If there's still love, there's still forgiveness. But to love from the beginning again, it doesn't just take the courage of that person, but also her own courage." Both were silent for a long time. Then he softly asked, "Do you still love me?" She replied without hesitation, "Yes. But I am no longer someone who only knows how to love." The words fell like a knife, leaving no blood but sharp to the bone. He nodded. An unnamed feeling rose within him, both hope and unease. The next day, she received a special invitation from the National Art Exhibition Institute. A solo exhibition by an artist who had just returned after 10 years of living and studying in France. His name was Tranduat Kiem. A handwritten letter was attached. "If you still remember a winter afternoon, at that small orphanage, the one who once listened to you cry in silence is still here. This time, I don't want to just stand behind you anymore. Her hand paused. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew he would return, but she never expected it to be right when everything was at its most uncertain. The exhibition was held on Friday afternoon. She told no one, quietly attending, not because she was hiding, but because she feared some coincidence would make her heart waver. But upon arriving, she didn't know. Luke Tram already knew beforehand. He stood in his car from afar, watching her in a long beige dress, her hair in a high bun, her face showing a hint of confusion as she entered the exhibition displaying the other man's paintings. In one corner of the exhibition was a watercolor painting titled, "Side Profile in the First Afternoon of Freedom," an image of a small girl, sitting and reading in the orphanage, her hair gently blowing in the wind. The eyes in the painting were Carvey's eyes, unmistakable. Tram subtly clenched his hand. For the first time in his life, he clearly felt something very primal, jealousy, an irrational, uncontrollable, uncalculated feeling. Simply unable to accept that the woman he loved had once been the light in another man's eyes. That evening, when she returned, he was waiting by the stairs. No arguments, no interrogations, just one question: what is he to you? She looked at him. Her eyes, as clear as the first day. He was the one who made me not give up hope. But he is not the one I love now. He nodded, his voice slow, almost a whisper. Then from now on, let me be that person. She didn't answer. She just walked up the stairs. When she was level with him, she stopped, lowered her head, and whispered into his ear, "You still have a chance. But don't just stand there watching." The weekend weather turned unusually cold. Early winter wind swept through the old quarter west of the city, creating rustling sounds like whispers of the past. Inside the classical European-style café, Carvey sat opposite Duart Kiem. The warm light from the overhead lamps highlighted the composed features of the man who had lived 10 years in Paris. Deep eyes, a straight nose, lips no longer bearing the carefree smile of an 18-year-old, but instead revealing experience, endurance, and a gaze that made it hard for the person opposite him to look away. Duart Kiem poured more tea into her cup, his voice low and slow. "I'm not surprised you came. I'm just not sure if you still remember who I am." She smiled faintly. "The only person who once carried me for 3 kilometers in the rain without complaining. I won't forget." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "Then let me be selfish for once. Today, I don't want to talk about the past anymore. I want to talk about the future. About, if I reach out my hand, would you take it?" She gently tightened her grip on the cup, her heart feeling squeezed, but her gaze remained calm. "Duart Kiem, you came at just the right time. Right when I was just starting to learn to let go." "Let go of whom?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately, just looked out the window, where red leaves swayed in the wind. Then softly said, "The man who once didn't believe me, but is now trying little by little to fix everything. He isn't perfect, but for the first time, he doesn't look at me as a substitute role." Duart Kiem looked up, his eyes suddenly darkening. "You love him?" "I'm learning to love again." The answer made the space between them thick. Then he smiled sadly. "Then I truly came too late. But I won't withdraw, because I owe you a choice that you didn't have that year." The cafe door suddenly swung open, the familiar jingling bell making both of them look up. The person who entered was Luke Tram, in a long, charcoal gray trench coat, his eyes as calm as a winter lake. He didn't look at Duart Kiem first, but stopped at Kavi's gaze, as if to ascertain if she was safe. When he saw her nod slightly, he then turned to the man opposite him. "I've come to pick up my wife." His voice wasn't loud or sharp, but carried an authority that silenced the entire room. Duat Kiem showed no expression, simply stood up and politely extended his hand. "Tran Duat Kiem." Tram Tam shook his hand, the grip of both men firm, their eyes meeting like two thin blades. "Luke Tram Tam, her legal husband." The atmosphere froze for a second. Kavi quickly interjected, "Both of you are people I cherish. No need to confront each other because of me." Tram Tam still looked directly at his opponent, not withdrawing his hand quickly, but his gaze had softened. "I'm not confronting. I just arrived at the right time, to not repeat the mistake of leaving her to face everything alone." Duat Kiem subtly curved his lips, "Then good luck. Because if I were an opponent, I wouldn't yield." "Me neither." Tram Tam released his hand, moved to her side, and gently placed his coat over Kavi's shoulders, a practiced motion like a long-standing habit. "Let's go," he said, not as a command, but as an invitation. She looked at him, then turned to Duat Kiem. "Thank you for not forgetting me." "I never forgot. But if you're happy, I won't hold on." The words fell like a farewell without needing a promise to meet again. On the way home, the car was silent. Tram Tam asked nothing, nor did he offer any excuses. It wasn't until the car stopped in front of the villa that he suddenly spoke. "I know I'm late, but I won't make you choose between the past and the present ever again." She turned to him, her voice light. "Aren't you afraid that one day I'll turn away?" He gripped the steering wheel. "I am afraid, but I'm even more afraid of doing nothing to keep you." She looked at him for a long time, then slowly said, "If you want me to choose, then prove it. Prove that I'm not an obligation, that your love didn't start because of a mistake." He looked at her, his eyes deep. "I won't say anything more, because this time, I want your heart to speak for itself." She got out of the car, saying nothing else, but for the first time, she didn't walk straight into the house. Instead, she waited for him to walk in with her. A small signal, but enough for Tram Tam to know he hadn't lost yet. That night, when she entered his study to retrieve some documents, she accidentally saw a framed drawing hanging on the wall. It was a pencil sketch, her profile as she smiled. From her first time volunteering at the orphanage, she froze. It was an unreleased photo, and the only person who had ever kept it was herself. She turned her head and saw him standing behind her, his gaze unwavering. "I've kept that photo for 7 years. Even before you knew I was Kavi? Since before I even knew your name. But your eyes, they're unmistakable." She trembled slightly, and for the first time, her tears fell not from pain, but because someone had finally truly seen her. That night, the Luke family villa was strangely quiet. No sounds of housekeepers' footsteps, not even the constant buzzing of the TV in the living room. In the study, Kavi stood still before the sketch, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Not a sob, not a wail, but quietly, just as she had lived all these years. Behind her, Luke Tram Tam stood silently, not approaching, not comforting, just letting her cry. For the first time, he understood the helplessness of facing the pain of the one he loved yet being unable to touch her. After a long while, she softly asked, her voice like wind blowing through a field, "How long have you kept this picture?" 7 years, he replied, his voice deep. "Why didn't you tear it?" Because I couldn't. Why? Because among all the memories I tried to forget, only the A's in this picture dared not blur. She turned back, her eyes moist, her eyelashes trembling, looking at him for a long time. You once said, if one day I cried because of you, you would let go. He looked at her, smiling faintly. I was foolish. I thought you were only strong when you didn't cry. But now I know. You cry because you're giving me a chance to stay within you. She choked, her hands clenched together, her heart feeling as if someone had tightly bound it with string. Tram Tam stepped closer, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks, his fingers touching her soft skin as if afraid of breaking it. The first time you cried because of me, it wasn't because of pain. It was because you had forgiven me. She nodded gently, saying nothing, just burying her head in his chest, wordless. But in that moment, his heart pounded, no longer the fear of loss, but the desire to cherish. It was love. The next morning, they ate breakfast together in silence, but without distance. She ate more than usual, and he picked food for her without being asked. The assistant walked in, handing over a folder. CEO. The bank has sent back the old statements for the group. There was an unusual withdrawal 7 years ago. Tram Tam flipped it open, examining it closely. This signature. It's Madame Tu's, her adoptive mother's? The assistant nodded. Yes. But this amount was not accounted for internally, and it was transferred to an overseas investment fund, now untraceable. Carvi's face paled. She put her glass down. You said it was my adoptive mother? Yes. And the time of the withdrawal was right after your father, Titian KY, suddenly passed away in an accident. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, but because a vague memory from that year suddenly shattered like glass underfoot. She remembered. The night her father died, Madame T didn't come home for 24 hours, only returning after the funeral was over. At the time, everyone thought she was too grief-stricken to see the coffin. But now, looking back, perhaps she was more concerned with managing assets than mourning. Tram Tam clenched his fist. I've sent people to reinvestigate the entire accident from that year. You're not alone anymore. This time, I'm with you. She looked at him, her heart trembling. He didn't need to say I love you. Just a I'm with you was enough to make her know that this love finally had form. That afternoon, she returned to the T family villa, for the first time in months. Madame T sat on the sofa like a queen, her eyes full of contempt. Now that Luke Tram Tam protects you, why are you back here? To show off your triumph? Carvey did not retreat, her eyes sharp. I just want to ask one question. That year, why did you hide the truth about my father's death from me? The woman flinched, but quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. The money transferred abroad. Your signature. I have the documents. Madame T smiled coldly. I didn't raise you to be a traitor. Don't think that just because Tram Tam has your back, you can say whatever you want. I don't need anyone's back. But I want justice for my father, who trusted you until his last breath. Madame T slammed the table and stood up. I'm warning you. Touch that matter and everyone dies. She didn't back down. I'm not afraid. Because I died once, the day you sold me as a substitute bride. Now, I only live to demand the truth. As she left the villa, the wind tossed her hair, her heart no longer fearful. For the first time, she faced the person who had manipulated her for over a decade, without trembling. That evening, she sat on the balcony, gazing at the starry sky, Tram Tam brought 2 cups of hot ginger tea and sat beside her. I know you were very brave today. I don't need anyone's acknowledgement. I'm not acknowledging. I admire. She turned to look at him, her eyes sparkling. Aren't you going to ask what I know? No. I just want you to know, no matter how much you know, I'm still here. She smiled, her eyes red-rimmed. The first time I cried, it was from pain. The second time, it was because you stayed. He placed his hand on hers. No more words needed. Only the synchronized heartbeat between 2 people who once thought they would never love again, but were now slowly finding each other. In the true light, one late autumn morning, the sky was pale gray. No rain but bitterly cold, as if a winter storm was about to sweep in. Takavi wore a thin overcoat, holding a small, old copper key she found in a wooden box under her father's old desk, something no one had noticed for 7 years, because it was hidden under a layer of false wood. She remembered the words the loyal old butler had whispered before leaving the Ta family. If one day you want to know why the master died, find the key in the 3rd wooden drawer under the desk. But it must be on a rainy night. And last night, it had rained. She held the key and entered to TNKY's study, a room that had been sealed since her father's death, becoming a shrine no one was allowed to disturb. The door creaked open, the smell of old wood and incense smoke choking her. Walking to the bookshelf against the wall, she bent down, looking for the old, rusty safe underneath. The key slid into the lock with a click and it opened. Inside was a thick envelope tied with a red fabric string, and familiar handwriting, only open when you are strong enough. Her hand trembled. It was her father's handwriting. She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten will. The ink faded with time, but every word was clear. The first line choked her. All assets under the name of TNKY after my death will be directly transferred to my sole legal heir, Takavi, my biological daughter. She continued reading, page by page. Every item and number clearly listed: shares in the conglomerate, fixed assets, personal overseas investment funds, all clearly stating her as the beneficiary. But the most shocking thing was not the assets, but the last part of the will. I suspect the accident that befell me may not have been due to carelessness. If my daughter Kavi finds this letter, it means everything has unfolded as I feared. The person behind it could be the closest one. Her hands fell, her heart pounding erratically. Just then, Madame Tu's voice echoed from behind the door. I knew you'd snoop around here. Clever. You even found the key. She turned around, clutching the will tightly. It was you. What did you do with the notarized will? The woman approached, her eyes no longer hiding anything. Tore it up. Destroyed it the night he died. And you still believe he considered you the true heir? I am his biological daughter? But you're an illegitimate child. You have no right to inherit a group. I had to swallow my pride for him to bring you into the Ta family. I endured humiliation for years. And now you want to take everything? I don't need a group. I need the truth. I need justice for my father. Madame Tu burst out laughing. Justice? You think with a copy of that blurry paper, you'll bring me down? I don't need a copy. I have the original. The woman froze. For the first time in many years, her eyes revealed clear panic. I've made a certified copy of this. And the one keeping it is Luke Tram Tam. That very evening, Luke Tram Tam officially released a copy of the will on the internal document system of the financial bank, where he had just been elected as a strategic shareholder. Immediately, All of the group's cash flow was temporarily frozen for investigation at the court's request. An emergency meeting took place the next morning. The press reported, Hidden will of TNKY reveals new heir, Takavi is the sole legal beneficiary of the assets. In the meeting room, Madame T screamed, pounding the table and demanding her lawyer object. But all the evidence was too clear. She sat upright, her gaze as cold as early winter snow. I don't need a single cent from this family. But I want everyone who ever pressured my father and trampled on my illegitimate child status, to pay the price. The woman lunged to tear up the documents but was restrained by security guards. Damn you. I raised you. Gave you the T surname. And now you're turning around and biting me? She looked at the woman. Her eyes pained but resolute. I once called you mother. But now I know. Family isn't about sharing the same surname. It's about having someone willing to protect you, even without shared blood. Upon returning to the villa, Kavi collapsed into Tramtam's arms, her body limp as if she had just weathered a hidden storm. He held her tightly, kissing her forehead. You did it. Kavi, you are no longer the girl who was sold as a substitute. She choked out. But I no longer have a father. No one by my side. You have me. I won't leave again. Because I'm the group's heir? He took her hand, placing it on his chest. Because you are the only one who makes my heart skip a beat. She laughed through her tears, hugging him tighter. For the first time, she felt she was no longer the one chosen, but the one choosing her own life again. That morning, the entire corporate media world was shaken when Loop Group, the leading financial conglomerate in Asia, officially sent an urgent press conference invitation with the title, Personal Statement and High-Level Personnel Transfer Plan. The news immediately spread across social media. Investors grew restless, and small shareholders immediately focused their attention on the headquarters where the pivotal meeting would take place. No one knew exactly what was happening. Only that Luke Dramtam, a man who had never appeared publicly with any woman other than business partners, suddenly announced he would clarify the identity of the person by his side. While the press scrambled to report, Takavi stood before a mirror in a nearly 100-square-meter dressing room at the Luke Villa, her hands trembling slightly as she touched a simple, elegant white dress, not a wedding dress, not opulent, but the first dress she wore for herself, not because anyone had arranged it. She gently pursed her lips. Are you sure? You want to announce me to the media? From behind, his deep, warm voice echoed. I've never been surer of anything than I am now. Before, I was the one who led you into the wrong relationship. Now, I want to be the only one to call you by the two most correct words, my wife. She turned around, her eyes a kaleidoscope of emotions, love, fear, gratitude, and a sense of rebirth after a lifetime of pain. He stepped closer, adjusting the button on her collar, his gaze gentle but firm. Today, you are no longer anyone's shadow. You are yourself. And you are the only one who will stand by my side. She nodded slightly, clenching her hands to keep her heart from pounding too hard. At 11 a.m., the 27th floor hall of Luke Group headquarters was packed. Hundreds of cameras aimed at the main stage. As the lights focused, Luke Dramtam emerged from the back door, holding Takavi's hand tightly. The entire audience gasped momentarily. No one expected the girl once rumored to be a substitute to be the one he led onto the honored platform. No secretary, no opening MC. Only him, standing before everyone, taking the microphone. His deep voice clear. Today, I am holding this press conference not to announce a strategic plan, but to do something. I've owed this woman for a very long time, a proper acknowledgement." The entire hall fell into dead silence. He turned to look at her. His eyes warm. "The person standing beside me today is Takavi, my legal, only, and forever wife. She is not anyone's substitute, not a bargaining chip in any contract, and certainly not the name behind the scenes of any arranged marriage. She is the one I chose. She is the one I love. She is the one I will spend the rest of my life making amends to." Cameras flashed wildly. Reporters buzzed. Microphones thrust forward with urgent questions. "CEO Luke, are you declaring war on the former Madam Luke? There are rumors that Mr. was once a substitute for your adopted sister. How do you respond? Will this statement affect the transfer of your shareholding to your family members?" Luke Tramtam put his hand on her shoulder. His gaze sharp and cold. "I do not respond to rumors. I only affirm, if anyone dares to call my wife a substitute again, I will personally use the law to silence them." The statement made the entire meeting room freeze. Kavi gently squeezed his hand, tilting her head to whisper, "You don't need to ruin your image for me." He smiled faintly, bending down to kiss her forehead amidst hundreds of cameras. "For you, I don't need an image. I just need you to look at me once, without doubt." Flashbulbs flickered wildly. But at that moment, there were only the two of them. One heart, one identity. That same afternoon, the hashtag Luke Tramtam legitimizes wife is Takavi topped Weibo. The declaration video spread across all media platforms. Her approval ratings skyrocketed, and brands that had previously rejected her immediately sent collaboration offers. But as public opinion swayed towards the light, an anonymous message was sent to Tramtam's assistant, accompanied by an old audio recording. In the recording, a vague voice echoed, "That girl. If she doesn't die before she's 28, she will be the one to overthrow the Ta family and the Luke family. Let her marry. Once married, it will be easier to act." Tramtam listened, his eyes darkening. The person in the recording was none other than his mother, Madame Luke, the most powerful woman in the political elite, and also the one who had coldly declared, "The Luke family does not accept anyone of unknown origin as a daughter-in-law." He clenched his hand, his face unchanged, saying only one sentence, "Lock all of Kavi's medical records. And from now on, she is not to go anywhere alone." That evening, he returned to the villa and saw her sitting in the garden, reading a book, the warm yellow light illuminating her long, flowing hair, making her look like a living painting. She looked up when she saw him. "Is something wrong? You don't seem like yourself." He walked closer, pulled her into his arms, holding her for a long time. She felt every slight tremor of his heartbeat. "Tramtam, I just realized that the world out there can be very cruel, but I won't let anyone touch you, not even my own mother." She stiffened. "What did you just say?" He fell silent, then looked straight into her eyes. "Perhaps our biggest battle is still ahead." That night, after the first winter rain swept through the city, leaving gleaming puddles reflecting the lights, Takavi sat alone in her study, staring intently at the stack of documents Luke Tramtam had brought back before leaving to meet shareholders. Among the thick files was an old household registration extract, where her name was not listed as Tatian-Ky's daughter as she had always thought, but bore a special identification code with the note, "Keep separate file, national security level." She pulled out the thin paper, her heart pounding. Next to it was a blurry black and white photo, but clear enough, a newborn baby girl wrapped in a red blanket, placed inside a crib in a private military-affiliated hospital. On the photo, scrawled in red ink, "Must live. At all costs." Kavi trembled. She remembered nothing about her infancy, having believed since childhood that she was Titian-Ky's biological daughter, simply because he once said, "Your father owes your mother so much, so this life will not let you lack anything." But now, shattered pieces of memory crashed back like a fierce wave. She opened the next file, the DNA test results that Luke Tramtam had quietly redone a week prior. Result, Tikav, no blood relation to Titian-Ky. No blood relation to any individual of the T family. She fell back into her chair, her forehead drenched in sweat. So, who was she? At the same time, in the old Luke family villa in the southern suburbs, a place no one was allowed to approach except direct family members, Luke Tramtam stood before a mahogany door carved with a proud phoenix. The woman inside was brewing tea. Her movements slow and graceful, not at all like someone about to order a killing. She didn't look up, only said indifferently, "Have you come to beg for her life?" Tramtam snarled, "I've come to ask, why did you order her death?" Madame Luke looked up, her deep black eyes like ancient lakes. "Because she shouldn't exist. She is a mistake, and mistakes must be erased. She's my wife. She's also the harbinger of disaster warned about in the ancient archives. The child born at that inauspicious hour, day, and month, carrying blood that could wipe out the Luke family if not controlled. That's just superstition. No. It's a warning from a lifetime of killing my father to keep a secret. You don't understand, Tam. You are keeping by your side someone born from a bloody pact between two families that once destroyed each other. She's a human being, not a sacrifice." Madame Luke scoffed, "And what are you? You were a child who almost died just for being placed next to that baby's cradle. Have you forgotten? Your congenital heart defect, it started after that." Tramtam froze, his heart pounding. "It can't be. I once spared her, on her wedding day, but not now, because she is no longer just the child who was a swapped bride, but the holder of the original agreement between the two and Luke families. If she speaks, this entire empire will collapse. Then I'll ask one last time, if you kill her, will you still be my mother? If you interfere, you'll die first. Then kill me." Tramtam spread his arms, his eyes unwavering. "I choose her, not because of love, but because I want to end this chain of bloodshed and superstition. If the Luke family cannot bear the truth, then don't live in lies." Madame Luke was silent for a very long time. Then she slowly put down her teacup, her voice as light as wind. "Then one of them must disappear. Either her, or me." Tramtam turned and left, his hands clenched until blood appeared. This war had no turning back. That night, the Luke family villa suddenly lost power. The security system was hacked within 30 seconds. A large, unidentifiable truck sped through the back gate, heading straight for the annex. In her room, Kavi woke up to a strange sound. Before she could react, the door was kicked open. 4 masked men in black stormed in. She screamed, "Who are you?" One of them pulled out a taser, firing it at her. But at the very moment the electric current flashed, another figure burst through the door, Luke Tramtam. A real gunshot rang out, and one assailant was instantly struck down. The other two turned and fled. But guards from Tram Tam's private special forces team were already waiting outside the door. The raid ended in 3 minutes. But none of the attackers survived to reveal the identity of their employer. Tram Tam knelt beside her, holding her trembling body tightly. His voice choked. "I'm sorry. I didn't get here sooner." She burst into tears. Not from fear but from a feeling of collapse. "They didn't want to steal property. They really wanted to kill me. No one has the right to touch you anymore. I swear." He carried her out, where a medical car was waiting. But as the door closed, his eyes turned icy. "From now on, it's not defense, it's attack." As the helicopter landed on the rooftop of the military-affiliated private hospital in the southern region, it was almost dawn, but the atmosphere was still heavy as lead, as if an unnamed storm was about to sweep through. Kavi was transferred to the Red Code area, a place only accessible to individuals with classified records. She lay on a pristine white bed, her eyes wide but lifeless, her hand gripping the necklace around her neck, something she had never taken off, not even when forced into marriage or when swapped. In the private monitoring room, Luke Tram Tam stood silently before the screen, witnessing the final DNA analysis results unlocked by the military-grade AI system. DNA connection, 98.7% match with hidden data P0189, codename, Phoenix, the last bloodline of the Moonlight Alliance organization, annihilated in a political assassination 28 years ago. His heart tightened. Everything was clear. The woman he loved was not just a victim of a swap, but a carefully hidden pawn of the very forces that had trampled both the Luke and Ta families in a blood pact. A senior doctor entered, handing him a newly printed folder. His voice serious. "She doesn't know anything. Her brain was once treated with memory suppression waves. This technology is only used in special witness protection cases. And only one place ever used it, Level 1 National Defense Security Center." Tram Tam clenched his hand. So, someone intentionally erased her childhood memories? Not just erased, but also reprogrammed her subconscious. And now, that program is beginning to awaken. Awaken? She will remember everything, but the cost will be a heavy load on her nervous system. It could cause permanent damage. Tram Tam fell silent. In him now was not just fear, but the feeling of holding a biological bomb. Something that could explode at any moment, if the wrong person touched it. 3 days later, Kavi woke up, her eyes strangely subdued. She was no longer as dazed as before, nor did she ask why she was there. She just looked at him, for a very long time, then spoke. Her voice hoarse. "I once lived in a place with a red wall. There was a man who called me Xiao Feng." Tram Tam froze. "What do you remember?" "I remember. Someone said I had to live. I was the key. But if one day I forgot, then no one would find what they buried." "What did they bury?" "A list. Code name. Assets. And the traitor within." She reached up to touch her forehead, her eyes seeming to stare into empty space. "I was the last person to see my biological father. He didn't die in an accident." A flash ignited in Tram Tam's eyes. He took her hand. "Your name is Kavi. But before that, in the secret file, your name was," she whispered, "Lam Feng Dao." The entire room fell silent. Madame Luke, who had once forbidden him from being with Kavi, now faced a harsh truth. The daughter-in-law she had just accepted was the very core that international forces had once pursued, because she carried the special genetic code of a clan that once manipulated East Asian finance. That evening, At the Luke Group shareholders meeting, as the powerful figures on the board discussed the transfer of power, the main doors burst open. Madame Luke entered, her face cold, followed by her private team of black-suited guards, not part of the corporate security system. "I have come to issue a warning." She looked around the room. The woman with the code name Phoenix, currently living with Luke Dramtam, is an existential threat to the survival of this family. If not dealt with, all our power will be wiped out in a single night. A shareholder asked, "Is there evidence?" She threw a thick, red-stamped confidential file onto the table. The Moonlight Alliance once controlled hundreds of billions of USD from covert illegal transactions. She holds the decryption key. If it falls into the hands of the government or enemies, everything ends. Immediately, the board erupted in commotion. Someone spoke up, "Are you saying a purge?" "There is no other choice." But at that very moment, the large screen behind them lit up. A live feed from the Central Management Office appeared. It was Luke Dramtam. He stood there, his voice clear and resonant. "If anyone dares to touch her, even with just a glance, I will remove the names of all relevant shareholders from the Luke Group, and transfer all their assets to an international humanitarian fund. You dare?" "I don't dare. I will do it." Immediately after that declaration, over 12 personal bank accounts of high-level shareholders were frozen. A temporary price drop occurred, but at the same time, the international market suddenly announced, Luke Group will become a strategic partner of the East Asian Reconstruction Bureau, a fund worth $3 trillion. This news stunned the entire board. Madame Luke clenched her hand. Her lips pressed together, understanding that she had lost, not just because of power, but because she had misjudged a person. Her daughter-in-law was not just her son's wife, but the one holding the life and death code of the entire empire. When things finally settled down, Kavi sat by the villa's window, her gaze calmer than ever. Tramtam walked over, sat beside her, and softly asked, "Are you ready to tell me everything now?" She nodded, gently touching the necklace around her neck. Inside the pendant is a microchip. It contains a list of accounts that once laundered money for the organization. If I die, the chip will automatically send a signal. But if I live, I can use it to buy recognition, or end an empire. He held her hand. "I choose to live with you, no empire needed." She leaned her head on his shoulder, softly whispering, "Then, I will choose to end everything, by starting over." In the darkness, their hands intertwined. One was pursued by the world, the other once stood at the pinnacle of power. But now, they were two people grasping their destiny with love, and a fateful name, Phoenix, a phoenix reborn from ashes. The sound of a piano lingered somewhere, a classical, melancholic melody, like an old key slowly unlocking a door sealed for nearly 30 years. In the isolation therapy room of the military hospital, Takavi sat opposite an old recording machine, her eyes wide, pupils seemingly reflecting no light, only the dense sediment of a soul being pulled to the depths of memory. Dim light cast on her pale face, her long hair falling to her shoulders, her hand trembling slightly as she heard the voice from the moldy tape, "Dao Dao. If one day you hear this tape, it means your parents couldn't return. Remember, you are not a mistake. You are a continuation. You were born to restore what is right, even if it means stepping over blood and ashes." An image flashed through her mind, a dark red house wall, small bloody hands clutching the shirt corner of a dying man. Memories burst forth, like a merciless waterfall. She sprang up, screaming silently, clutching her head as if to tear at her scalp. The doctor rushed in to restrain her, a tranquilizer needle piercing her skin. But her eyes remained wide, her mouth mumbling in delirium, Don't kill father. Dao Dao will be good. Don't take Dao Dao away," she sobbed like a 4-year-old child, as if her soul was pulled back to the moment when everything was torn apart by gunshots, smoke, fire, and betrayal. Tram Tam rushed over upon hearing the news. When he arrived, the doctor had just removed the 4th tube. Shaking his head, "She has just fully awakened her precognitive memories. This is a form of memory not processed by language, only stored as images, emotions, and survival reactions. She doesn't remember with words, but remembers with pain." He sat down by the bed, watching her thin hands clutching the bedsheets, her entire body trembling uncontrollably, her eyes looking at him vaguely as if they had never met. "It's me." She blinked, her lips barely moving. "Fire. Very big. Smell of ash. Smell of burning hair." Further screaming. "Run. Dao Dao. Don't look back." Then everything went dark. She burst into panicked tears, her hands unconsciously clinging to his neck like a drowning person to a wooden plank. He held her tight, whispering, "It's okay. You are in the present. You are safe. You don't need to run anymore." But he knew, the scar in her memory would never heal. That evening, after she fell asleep from the tranquilizer, Tram Tam left the hospital and went to meet the only person who still held clues about the massacre from that year, a former agent who once worked in the Moonlight Alliance organization, now living in seclusion in the mountains. The man showed him an old photograph, 3 people standing together. One was Kavai's biological father, Lam Kwang Duke. The second was her mother, a long-haired woman with eyes bright as knives. And the third was Madame Luke's father. "Do you understand?" the former agent asked, his voice raspy like grinding pebbles. "That massacre was to secure Luke family's political seat. Lam Kwang Duke was seen as a threat, as he held all the black accounts that various factions used to launder money through the Moonlight Alliance. But he didn't betray. He just wanted to end it. And he died for the right thing?" Tram Tam asked, clenching his hand into a fist. "No. He didn't die." "What?" "I was the one who pulled him out of the ashes after the explosion. But he lost his memory. Or intentionally lost his memory. No one has found him since then. But I know he's alive, because he has one sole goal, to find his daughter. And if he knows she just survived the assassination attempt, he will return." At the same time, in an ancient temple deep in the mountains, a silhouette of an old man emerged from the shadows, holding prayer beads, his eyes silently gazing up at the starry sky. The person beside him bowed his head. "They failed. Your daughter is still alive." The man nodded gently, slowly opening his mouth. "Enough. I will no longer hide. If blood must be shed to end this cycle, then I will begin with my own hands." He looked up, his once cloudy eyes suddenly gleaming with determination. "Phoenix has returned. It's time for the ashbird to rise from the very ruins where it was once burned." The city lights up like a sparkling sea of stars, but deep beneath each light are thousands of towering buildings stacked with never-before-revealed secrets. In the quiet villa in the heart of Danhoa urban area, Takavi stood silently before a large mirror, her eyes reflecting a woman who was no longer the swapped bride of days gone by, but a version gradually shedding the cloak of fate. The small necklace around her neck still glowed with a soft light like embers at the bottom of ashes. She gently tightened her grip on the pendant, quietly whispering, "Phoenix, it's time to remember everything." After psychological therapy and memory activation through deep hypnosis, each fragment of her memory was reassembled as if an invisible hand was guiding the way. Bloody images, screams, her father's voice calling her name amidst the flames, and her mother's voice, chillingly calm, "If you must live, then never look back. Phoenix, only reborn when the ashes turn cold." Each word echoed from the abyss of her subconscious, making it impossible for her to breathe. She walked out onto the balcony, her eyes following the flickering traffic lights, silently asking, "Father, if you're still alive, why did you leave me for all these years?" But she didn't know that, at that very moment, someone was watching her from the opposite side, infrared binoculars not missing her every movement. In the dark room on the top floor of the opposite skyscraper, an elderly man, with salt and pepper hair, eyes as deep as a bottomless abyss, stood motionless like a statue. Beside him, an assistant held a thick file, quietly reporting, "Luke Dramtam has brought her back to the main villa. Madam Luke knows you are alive, and the entire council is mobilizing." He did not turn around, only softly said, "So many years. Finally the day has come when the child looks towards the light without fear anymore. Sir, would you like to make contact?" The man, none other than Lam Kwong Duk, Kavai's biological father, shook his head. "No. I cannot appear until she is truly awake. If her memories are not fully integrated, I will become the final haunting in her mind, and I don't want to be a nightmare." But when he turned away, his eyes were red-rimmed as if crushed by the past itself, so much so that he could no longer stand straight. He pulled an old piece of paper from his pocket, a child's crude drawing, signed Dao Dao, 4 years old, drawing Daddy and Mommy. Beneath the naive drawing were 3 figures, a tall man, a long-haired woman, and a little girl with pigtails, smiling brightly. Meanwhile, at the Luke family residence, a secret meeting between Madame Luke and several other powerful figures was taking place behind a triple locked door. She threw satellite images of the hidden camp where Lam Kwong Duk used to frequent onto the table. "He's still alive, and now he's back," someone spoke up. "Luke Group cannot let him come into the light. If he reveals the original agreement with the group and gives Phoenix the right to activate the old organization's reserve accounts, our entire past will be exposed." Madame Luke said coldly, "I don't need to repeat this for the 3rd time. Lam Kwong Duk must die. This time. For real. What about your son? He doesn't know everything. And if he knew, he would choose to die rather than let the girl be harmed." Her hand trembled slightly, but there wasn't a ripple of emotion in her eyes. The second assassination plot was reactivated. This time the target was no longer Kavi, but her own father, who could activate a chain of hidden assets and collapse the financial pillars of the 3 largest families in East Asia. That evening, in a small room on the outskirts, Dramtam received an unmarked envelope containing a scanned image of an original birth certificate, clearly stating, "Lam Fong Dao, legitimate daughter of Lam Kwong Duk and Tran Tuat Nei, born July 15 at Medical Base No. 4. Along with it was a handwritten note, "To save her, go to abandoned station No. 17, Section B alone." He knew it was a trap, but in his heart, there was a voice stronger than all reason. If her father is still alive, she deserves to know. If he is not an enemy, Then I have no right to hide him from her for another second. He drove away from the villa in the middle of the night, leaving her a short message: "If I don't come back, don't forgive me. But don't cry, because I have never regretted loving you." And then, the car disappeared into the night, where old secrets awaited to be unraveled with blood. Station number 17, Section B, an abandoned structure in an old industrial zone. Untouched for nearly 2 decades. The night wind whistled through the gaps in the rusty iron bars, creating a creaking sound like the moans of restless spirits. The clock struck 2 a.m. Luke Tram stopped his car about 100 meters from the station gate, one hand gripping his pistol, the other checking his handheld signal receiver. Everything was eerily quiet, quiet like the lull before a bloodbath. He stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping across crumbling walls, old dried bloodstains from the Civil War era. A husky voice echoed from the second floor, "You've arrived." Tram looked up. An old figure stood in the dilapidated hallway, holding a string of wooden beads, his spine still straight like a blade that had once cut through the times. Lam Kwong Duk, the man who had disappeared from history. "You are." Tram took slow steps. "I am the one who did everything to keep my daughter alive, even faking my own death. Why are you appearing now?" "Because she has awakened. I couldn't step out until she remembered her father's eyes on that fiery night. Do you know how she has lived?" "I know. And I have lived long enough to feel every beat of her pain in my very bones." Tram lowered his gun, his voice deep and hoarse. "I love her." Lam Kwong Duk looked at him, his gaze no longer cold but as still as water in a deep well. "I know. That's why I'm here." Suddenly, a gunshot echoed from afar. The bullet grazed Lam Kwong Duk's shoulder, making him collapse. Tram immediately pulled him behind a concrete pillar, drawing his gun and returning fire. "They've found us," Lam Kwong Duk growled. "Who are they?" "Not just Madame Luke, but also the one who once saved Dao Dao from the inferno." "What?" Tram froze. "You mean, not you?" "No. I was unconscious then. The one who pulled her out was Tran Tui, her mother's younger brother, also the top-secret commander of the underground network behind Moonlight Alliance. But he died in the chase, dead on paper, but in reality, he disappeared to erase all evidence, and from then on became her protector, by killing anyone who could uncover the truth." "Even you?" "Yes." Another volley of shots rang out. This time, the shooter didn't hide his face. Tran Tui, a middle-aged man with graying hair, wearing a black suit, stood in the blood-stained concrete yard, holding a silenced pistol, his voice still light as if giving a presentation. "Welcome back to the real world, brother-in-law." His gaze shifted to Tram. "You are the heir of the Luke family, also the only one brave enough to love Phoenix. I admire that. What do you want?" Tram gripped his gun tightly, shielding Lam Kwong Duk. "I want to keep her alive, but not as an ordinary daughter. She is a genetic code. She is the lock. She is the core. If she lives as an ordinary woman, all those who died to keep this secret will have died in vain. She's a human, not a weapon." "You're wrong. She was born to restore order, and I won't allow anyone, not even you, to pull her away from her mission." He raised his gun. A shot rang out, not from him, but from behind him. Kavi emerged from the shadows, her hand trembling as she held a Glock, her eyes tear-filled but her gaze icy. "Uncle Tui, you killed my mother?" Tran Tui stood still, his voice steady. No. Your mother threw herself into the fire. Because she knew if she was caught, she would reveal your locator code. She died. So you could live. And how many people did you kill to protect me? Not enough if you betray your mission. Carvey screamed, I'm not a genetic code. I'm not Phoenix. I'm a person. I'm my parents' daughter. Luke Tram-Tam's wife. A human being who knows pain, fear, and love. Her breath hitched. The gun in her hand trembling uncontrollably. If you take another step, I'll pull the trigger. The air stood still. Each second stretched out endlessly. Tran 2 lowered his gun. Then, you choose. I choose to live as a human, not as a symbol of death. She pulled the trigger. The bullet lodged in his shoulder. He did not shoot back. He just looked at her. His eyes empty. Then I have failed. As your mother feared. Then he turned away, blood dripping onto the concrete floor. She collapsed, sobbing in Tram-Tam's arms. Lam Kwangduk walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. You chose correctly. For the first time in 28 years, their family stood together, amidst ruins, blood, and ashes. And from that night on, Phoenix was no longer a symbol of lineage, but a human being, free, living for herself.